We are joined in studio by Ken Blaisdell. Ken, a pleasure to have you here tonight.
Thank you, Miles. Yeah, it's a real pleasure for me, too.
So, Ken's also a radio guy, loves listening to WATD and some of the other local Ed Perry radio network channels as well. First and foremost, you know the question I'm going to ask. How'd you catch the racing bug?
Well, it started when I was just a kid, maybe 8 years old, 10 years old, somewhere around there. It was my dad knew one of the drivers and one of the car builders over at Norwood Arena. His name was Jack Malone. He actually lived right down the street from us, maybe 5 houses down. We lived on the same street. And I can remember as a young kid that I could hear the engine revving down there at Jack's house when he was working on the car. This was, before he even had a shop in the downtown area. So my dad said, we should really get over to the track sometime. So all of us kids piled in the car, and off we went to Norwood. And I just remember it was such an exciting time for all of us kids, with the hamburgers and the onions on the burgers, and just everything was just great. The fans were terrific, and the racing was like something we had never seen before. And so I think that's kind of what gave me the bug. And so it just kind of went from there. We had a lot of people in town that were involved.
So, obviously, fandom of this track, there's so many stories. There's still, to this day, reunions that go on. But tell us about your experience at Norwood Arena. What do you remember? What drew you to the track, whether it be weekly, daily, monthly? Tell us a little bit about your experience.
So for me, it was just kind of what was going on each day for me in town. So there was a gas station that we used to go to all the time. A guy by the name of Bob Bakioki owned it, and he used to build cars, and he raced at Norwood. And so I used to see the car out in the back of the garage all the time, and he'd be working on it during the week. And then when he was ready to go, usually on Saturday afternoon, the car was always out in the front on the trailer ready to go over. And so he was one of the fellas. And then there was another guy that used to do a lot of welding, Bob Melnick. He did a lot of chassis work and built cars. And these guys were up in the center of town in a place that we used to call Gasoline Alley. So when we were kids, we used to hang around up there. And the drivers and the guys that worked up there on their cars, they used to kind of just tolerate us. They never kicked us out, but a guy like Bobby Melnick, who was always welding and everything, he would warn us, hey guys, don't look at the arc because it can damage your eyes. So he didn't kick us out, but he just told us to be careful. So they kind of were, they were just nice to us. And so we got kind of like familiar with what they were doing and get to know their cars. And so we asked our parents to get us over to the track. And then as we got older as teenagers, we decided that, we'd go over to the track all the time. So that's kind of how it grew for us.
Ken, do you ever build your own car and drive it at the track, or what?
Well, so no, I never did drive at Norwood, but yeah, we did. My buddies and I, we used to build cars, and so I had a couple of cars, one in particular that I built. And this fella, his name was Gavin Cooper, who was one of the original guys at Norwood Arena. He had a speed shop right out on Route 1 in Norwood, and Gavin helped me put all the components that I needed for my motor together. I had a 55 Ford, and he helped me get the camshaft and the crankshafts and the pistons and rings and all the stuff that I would need. And he knew just how to get that car set up so it would have a lot of low-end torque. That's what I was looking for.
So as a fan, obviously nowadays racing is, as they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. A lot of fan clubs nowadays for different drivers, etc. Was there anything like fan clubs back then for these local drivers? Anything that you were involved in?
Well, there was, and I know there was at least 2 or 3 fan clubs that I was aware of. So I knew Leo Cleary had a fan club, and Bugsy Stevens had one, and Bill Slater had one. So when I used to go to the track, I always sat on the first turn, and there was a lady there that was always like blowing this horn all the time, and it was just, I didn't know. I met her years later. It's just kind of strange. But she was like, she called herself the president of the First Turn fan club. And her her favorite driver was Bill Slater. So there were clubs. And the thing about Norwood was if you had, it got cold there at night. So if you had a jacket or if you had a blanket you were sitting on or whatever, and you wanted to go to the get a hot dog or a beer, or of course we didn't at that age, but you could leave your stuff right there. No one ever bothered it. Everybody was a family. It didn't matter who you were rooting for, but it was just like a family affair. There was a lot of kids running around, and it was a great place to be.
To throw a couple more names at you, what do guys like Pete Hamilton and Don McTavish mean to yourself and others who experienced Norwood and were around during that time?
Well, Donnie McTavish, he was like, he was almost like a face of Norwood Arena. He was a darling of Norwood. He grew up in Dover. He lived in Dover, and he worked on his cars over there. There was no regional high school. Dover's a very small town, and he went to Needham High School, which is where I went to high school. And so he was a guy that was around town, and we all know that, he came to a tragic ending, but he was a guy that, he built his own cars, he raced his own cars, and he did a lot of demo derbies and so forth, and that's how he supported his racing career, was by winning the demolition derbies. So, and I know he did demos all over the country and made a lot of money that way. But everybody loved him, and it was just a tragic ending for him. But that's one of the, I guess that happens sometimes.
So Pete Hamilton, obviously a name Ben just brought up. Is Daytona 500 champion, and obviously cut his teeth locally here, being from Needham, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Yep.
Talk to us a little bit about Pete Hamilton.
So Pete, so he probably got the job that I really wanted to get, but he was like 6 years older than me. So Bob Bakioki had hired him to work at the gas station. And so he was pumping gas and, doing stuff, checking oil and doing all that kind of stuff. I don't think he really had an interest in racing. But because Bob used to hang around with Bobby Melnick and Ed Flemke down at the Gasoline Alley, Jack Malone, those types of guys, they soon found out that Pete had a real thing for racing, and he was really interested. He was technical, and he was like a sponge absorbing all the information that they could give to him. So Pete was kind of brought along by those guys, and he bought a car from Bobby Melnick. It was a V8 car. It was a hobby car. It was the number was V8, and he started winning races. And so that's how we got going. And then by the time he was, I think, 24, he had won 3 features at Norwood, and I think he was driving the Worcester Sand and Gravel car, number 69. And then the following year, he started running down on some of the southern tracks, and he ran all over, and he became the Sportsman National Champion in the 69 Worcester Sand and Gravel car. So that's how he kind of got going there. Then the following year, he was 26 years old. He was Winston Cup Rookie of the Year. And then the following year, when he was 27, he was sitting around and he got a call from Richard Petty and said, Pete, how'd you like to come down, he says, and drive my number 2 car at Daytona? And Pete said, well, gee, let me check. I'm this blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid from Needham, Mass. And Richard Petty's on the phone. He wants me to call. He's thinking this. And he said, I'll be there in an hour. And he said, and I was there in an hour. And from there, he helped Richard. They had both cars there. They were the Plymouth Superbirds, and they had both cars there. They weren't even painted or ready to go yet. But Pete said that they worked on those cars together. Richard Petty was twisting wrenches in those days, too, and both cars were set up exactly the same, and he worked on his car, and they both worked on both cars together. So, and as it turns out, as fate would have it, Richard Petty blew an engine very early. He was actually the first car out of the race. And, of course, the question came, was Richard going to pull Pete out of the car, the number 2 car? And Richard said, no, it's his race. And so he went on to win in the number 40 Superbird.
Excellent.
Why do you feel the story of Norwood needs to be as documented as it has been? I know it might seem small to the outside world, but guys like us, a young kid like me who doesn't know all too much, why do you feel like the story needs to be told?
Well, I think that it needs to be told is there was a lot of people at Norwood Arena that were felt like family, and I think the reunions that we had, and I think are still having, just brought to light. If you go onto that Norwood Arena website, it's norwoodarena.com, you can see how much information is on there, and people. It took a lot to put that together. And it's because the memories are there. I mean, here you had a NASCAR track on Route 1 in Norwood, Massachusetts, halfway between, what is now Gillette Stadium and Boston. It was just a tremendous venue. And, of course, they did drag racing they started the drag racing on an 8th-mile track there. It was just the total package. It was actually run by New England Dragway, and they called it New England Dragway South. And I know that, talk about radio, I know that Arnie Ginsberg was actually on WMEX. He had a 40 market share back in those days on the 5 to 8 time slot. And he catered to the teenagers, and he did live spots for Norwood Arena. And the kids came from everywhere. They drove once they got their licenses, boy, they would come into Norwood Arena. Place was packed every Saturday night and Friday nights for the drags.
So, yeah, answer your question a little bit, Ben, too. I mean, just from my perspective, the reason why, Norwood's so important is all those great names came from there. Mm-hmm. I mean, he said one, it just slipped through the radar, Ed Flemke, right? Yeah. And then Bug Stevens in Hamilton, right? And in Carafas, that's another one from my town. Right, yep. That it used to, they lived by that place, yep. And I never even saw it, but the stories that come out of it are told to me, and that was one of the regrets I never saw it.
And not to mention, and this we haven't even covered it, which we've got Jerry Kelleher in the bullpen ready to go, this isn't a baseball show, so Jerry Kelleher is on pit road ready to roll off and come in for the final segment of the show, but. One thing that I learned recently, and we're going to talk to Jerry about the movie as well, but I learned that the NASCAR Cup Series ran a race at Norwood Arena in 1961, the Yankee 500, which not 500 miles, 500 laps, because it was such a bull ring, small track. But I guess the final question of this portion, to Ken, I know you weren't in attendance, but what does it mean maybe to you as somebody who appreciates Norwood Arena to know that, the big guys in stock car racing were in our neck of the woods running up there back in 1961?
Well, it's hard to really put it into words, I guess, but I mean, it's a sense of pride that people have in the New England area, and the drivers were, they used to say that if you can drive and win at Norwood, you can win anywhere. And it was a very tough place to win races at because the fields were large, the track was small, the drivers were tough. And so if you could win there, pretty basically you could win everywhere. And there was a lot of guys that won all over the country that started their careers at Norwood. And there was some other racing people, too, that I think some engine builders and some car builders started there that had some national attention, too. So,
Excellent. So I told Ken on the car ride over that there's probably going to be a part 2 because I'm sure we didn't cover nearly as much as we wanted to, with Jerry Kelleher ready to roll to talk about the movie portion, the Norwood Arena movie, which I caught this week. But certainly an exciting conversation here. Any quick final thoughts you might have missed that you might want to just at least throw out there before we take a break?
Just real quick, one of the things that Don Thomas told me just recently was that when he was getting all the information and everything ready for the website, when they first launched it, norwoodarena.com, he was put the word out that he was looking for photographs, information, whatever people could send him, money, whatever they had to help out. The very first donation he got was from the recently, at that time, widow of the Vendetti, of Anthony Vendetti from Seekonk Speedway. She was the very first donation that he got for starting the Norwood Arena historic website. So it just shows to me that as a racing family, they weren't competitors as far as the tracks were concerned. They were competing for, like she said, the restaurants, the movie theaters, the weekend resort places. They wanted people to come to the racetrack. So they would be a group that would go to Seekonk, and there was always a group that would go to Norwood. And that's kind of the final thought. It's a family type of thing.
It is certainly a tight-knit racing community. So great to hear a fan's perspective as Ken Blaisdell joins us here in studio. I call him a historian and enthusiast of Norwood Arena, which he is, but he's also a fan. Pleasure to get that perspective. Ken's going to stick around, and we're going to take a quick break. Of course, part 1 of our 2-part, you could say, In the Turn interview tonight